thanks everyone for joining. Today, we are going to cover three broad topics as we go over supply chain and impacts and how they relate to AI PC. So first, we'll start out talking about some memory market dynamics before we talk a little bit more broadly about what we've seen in AI PC and the types of ecosystem investments that have driven the market thus far and going forward into 2026. And then we will share some of our forward-looking expectations in this space as well. So today your presenters are myself, Angela. I'm a principal analyst here at TBR that covers OEMs, and I'm also joined by my colleague Ben Carbonneau, a senior analyst who also covers OEMs and semiconductor here at TBR. So we'll again start out with some of the memory market dynamics. This is a call about PCs, but I'm going to turn it over to Ben to first start talking a little bit about server.
All right. Yeah, so here you'll see TBR's updated AI server market forecast and the importance and how this ties in to today's webinar topic is really because the robust AI server demand that we're seeing in the market is what's shifting the dynamic in the memory market. So right now, a large AI infrastructure build out is underway. Hyperscaler capex is really high, and a lot of that capex is going to AI systems, AI infrastructure systems that all require a lot of high bandwidth memory. So I'll talk about the memory market a little bit and its composition, and then what we're seeing there. So high bandwidth memory, just in general, is going to be a higher margin product than your traditional commodity memory, which would include storage, so flash storage like NAND, and then your DDR memories like DDR5 and LPDDR5X. So what's occurring right now is a very large increase in high bandwidth memory demand, and its implication is that memory manufacturers, because high bandwidth memory is a higher margin offering, are prioritizing their capacity build-outs for high bandwidth memory. So it's not so much that it's a situation of PC memory or commodity memory supply shrinking. It's just the situation where the demand for commodity memory is actually increasing faster than supply because the new supply that's being brought online is for high bandwidth memory rather than that memory going into PCs and other devices. So a couple other factors at play, kind of aside from the AI server dynamics and the large amount of investment that's going there for the infrastructure build out, would just be traditional server modernization. So we continue to see organizations refreshing their traditional infrastructure. Kind of that DDR4 to DDR5 memory transition is still occurring for most enterprises right now. And then I think it's also been accelerated by enterprises wanting to invest in traditional data center modernization ahead of AI infrastructure build out on premises. So that's to kind of make floor space and also free up some energy capacity in your data center for on-premises AI infrastructure deployments, which we haven't really seen so far. On the client device side of the market, kind of a really big trend we're seeing now is AI PCs require more memory than their non-AI PC counterparts, kind of the equivalent performance specs of what was the non-AI PC equivalent to an AI PC today. So for example, Copilot Plus PCs to be in that category defined by Microsoft require at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. So right now, something that we're seeing PC OEMs do is kind of push a decontenting strategy where they're trying to steer demand toward lower memory configurations. So things with maybe 8 gigabytes of RAM instead of 16 or 32. However, with that Copilot Plus PC specification of 16 gigabytes of RAM, decontenting can really only happen down to that level. So it has kind of a bottom threshold for decontenting there. So that's a big driver. And then just in general, the commercial PC refresh cycle is driving demand for devices. So that's at play. Also, LPDDR5X, which is what's going to be found in most thin and light laptops. So your Copilot PC, Copilot Plus PC laptops, as well as tablets and smartphones. Demand for that is increasing, and while the margins are a little bit higher than they are for a traditional DDR5 by gigabyte, there's still nothing compared to what HBM demand is. So again, that's why there's really this push from the major memory manufacturers, which include Micron, SK Hynix, and Samsung, to create HBM capacity rather than creating more commodity memory capacity. I think another thing that's important to note is how the memory manufacturers are aligned in kind of what capacity that they're bringing online or bringing offline. For example, a few years ago, there was a lot of commodity memory on the market. So there was an agreement, and it's not collusion. I think it's important to have that be clear. It's not collusion in the market, but it's just really close alignment to drive prices on this commodity RAM, where the big three memory manufacturers actually cut supply to increase prices. And again, just really important to emphasize that's alignment and not collusion. But we're kind of seeing the same situation now. Well, it's margin induced, with HBM being higher margin than DDR, as well as NAND storage. It's also a situation where the memory manufacturers want to see those prices go up a little bit. So we're seeing less supply growth for PC DRAM. And I think kind of leading into the topic that I'll throw it over to Angela for, the result kind of in summary is that less growth for PC DRAM is really just driving higher PC bill of materials, which is resulting in PC price inflation to protect margins. And that is having implications on the rate of AI PC adoption, as well as the commercial refresh cycle.
Okay, great. So let's take a look at AI PC adoption thus far. First, we'll just look at what TBR saw in 2025. So we have some metrics up here from our AI PC landscape that looks at adoption of AI PC. And overall, there certainly was adoption of AI PCs in 2025. It was not necessarily at the rate that was originally intended, but overall, from a revenue perspective, it was a little less than 40% of PC revenue generated. Keep in mind that from a unit perspective, that would look different, right? Because AI PCs are fetching a higher price point. So there's a disproportionate amount of revenue there. So what I think TBR saw in the market over the past year, and where kind of expectations and reality disconnected, there was a couple of elements there. So first and foremost, overall, the concept of commercial PC refresh related to Windows 11 materializing a little bit slower than expected, in turn impacted the speed of adoption of AI PC. Tariffs also caused a snag here. So with the cost uplift to upgrade to an AI PC, for many customers, it could be 10 to 20% if they want to switch to a device with an NPU compared to what they had previously purchased. Having to also deal with tariff-related price increases, that was a challenge that was repeated to us multiple times from sellers in the market who are struggling with this. The ecosystem players did respond in kind, which helped to push more AI PC out into the market. So we saw a few different things, notably that companies like Microsoft, Intel, and AMD adjusted go-to-market strategy to help reduce some of the friction and keep the AI PCs moving. So things like increasing front-end discounting on some of these devices, rebates, co-marketing investments to essentially help narrow the price gap that customers are seeing between traditional PCs and AI PCs, which did help with more adoption of AI PC in 2025. But again, not necessarily what was originally projected there. From a vendor perspective, we saw Lenovo in particular be most aggressive with their AI PC promotion. And a fair amount of that has to do with growth outside the US as well. Lenovo performed really well in the APAC market last year, as well as strong performance in EMEA as well. So in terms of some of the ecosystem investments that we've seen and how that relates to opportunities to leverage the NPU, I think this is where we see continued investments today from the likes of Intel, Microsoft, and the PC manufacturers as well, and ISVs. So importantly, Microsoft supporting toolkits to enhance existing applications. On the hardware side, we see Intel having a similar program that is supporting and incentivizing independent hardware vendors to develop features that leverage NPUs as well. So really what we're talking about here is, how are we creating more value to the commercial or consumer end user for the NPU, right? I think that was one of the gaps that we saw last year and we still see today that customers are grappling with and trying to figure out. So that is one push that we see ongoing and will continue to, alongside the recent launch of the 3rd generation NPU enabled silicon. Expanded security capabilities we think will be ultimately a really big feature that is ultimately going to lead to success of AI PC long term. There's some initial capabilities within this space today, but Ben will talk a little bit about how we see over the long term this providing more value to customers than maybe just point features within applications. Then on the OEM side as well, another area we see investment and focus on leveraging NPU would be in proprietary AI apps and platforms. So Lenovo and HP have both announced their own versions of AI assistants within their hardware. We've seen Dell take a little bit of a different approach, more with Pro AI Studio, for example, a little bit more focused on targeting the developer market within the AI PC category. But there certainly is some degree of differentiation that we're seeing within these investments where different ecosystem players are trying to illustrate the potential value that customers can derive from the increased spend on these devices. So how has our forecast changed with all these market dynamics? This version of our forecast probably published about a month or so ago, compared to what we expected about a year ago. Our 2026 figure there at 60 billion in Windows AI PC revenue this year is probably about $20 billion less than what was previously forecasted. And the same is true for 2027, really because of those short-term drivers. So memory pricing impacts being a huge one. It's difficult when customers have finite spend and they're already facing a significant price increase on memory, which really does not deliver additional value to the customer, but they have no choice in the matter. So that piece is certainly going to have the short-term impact. The lack of killer app is the other piece that we were just kind of discussing, where we saw slower than expected adoption in 2025 because there was some customer confusion and more messaging on future proofing than on what value can be delivered today. So pricing, that was one constraint. The overall messaging, one constraint. I think the others that Ben touched on a little bit as well are availability and product assortment. So we'll certainly see that easily through 2027 having some degree of negative impact on the AI PC market forecast as we see vendors prioritizing specific models where they can maximize production and profitability. Then on the long-term side, we'll go into some of these potential security use cases. Another way we see that AI PC adoption will improve over several years will be as silicon manufacturing costs lower over time. So we're just starting to see the third generation of Intel and AMD's NPU-enabled silicon, just starting out on the 18A process. As these products mature, have longer tails, we'll see costs go down on these components, and ultimately there will be a little less of a jump between buying an AI PC and what customers have previously purchased in the market. Do we think that AI PC will become 100% penetration within a few years from now? No. And probably never will be, just because of the fact that there will always be a market for really entry-level devices, particularly in emerging markets or in particular commercial settings where a really basic PC is all that's being asked for. We don't necessarily project within this forecast that the mix will ever truly hit 100% of the market. However, we do expect that it will over time become quite high. So in short, for the short term, as the AI PC mix increases, that's really going to be based more on availability of chips and the manufacturer's emphasis on flooding the market with those chips than organic customer demand. But we do expect that over time, the ecosystem will continue to make adjustments that will deliver more value to the end user. So Ben, I'll turn it back to you to kind of talk about what we see from more of a long-term perspective.
Sure, yeah, I think that's a great bridge. And kind of thinking about the market from a killer app perspective, and then hearing about what the ecosystem players are doing to drive AI PC adoption, because really, if you think about the PC ecosystem being comprised of the OEMs, the silicon vendor, and then the OS provider, so Microsoft with Windows, you see that all three of those ecosystem groups are aligned in wanting AI PC adoption to take off. For a while, we've seen OEMs focusing on device premiumization, so higher ASPs. These are also more complex processors, so higher value SoCs for the silicon vendors. And then it also, for Microsoft, I think the real piece there is staying competitive with Apple. So there was, I think, like a perception for a while that Apple was stronger on battery, and battery life was kind of a big marketing point. I think Intel Core Ultra 2 was really, Ultra 1 and 2 were really proof points that a Windows PC could have that kind of sustaining battery life. And then obviously Windows on ARM with the Qualcomm stuff, another battery life kind of proof point. So I think tying that into just the whole discussion around the AI PCs and the NPU, I think it's important to step back and look at what the NPU does well and how that ties into killer applications. So I think when the AI PC topic first came to be, we were researching it, and there was really a lot of talk around this killer application coming to market. You heard the OEMs talking about it on their earnings call, kind of saying that AI PC adoption was really going to take off with this killer application came to market, and that every quarter it seemed like it was just one quarter out and that killer application was coming. It's really our belief that because the NPU is really good for kind of sustained but low power, always on kind of background inference applications, that there's not going to be one standalone application that is enabled by the NPU, but rather it will be a situation, and then kind of tying it back to what Angela was talking about with the ISVs, where certain applications that exist now will run with better performance if they feature the NPU. It's not that an NPU-enabled device is going to be the gating factor for a lot of these applications to run. And again, that just ties back to GPUs, not even discrete, but an integrated GPU on a silicon SoC is going to offer higher AI performance or AI TOPS performance. It's a metric we often hear than an NPU ever will. And that's really what it's designed to do, but it's going to draw more power. So the NPU is really good. Again, I think just for the framing of this, we'll talk about on this slide, to understand that the NPU is good at the low power sustained workloads in the background. And another kind of parallel NPU adoption story would just be what we've seen in smartphones. So smartphone silicon, starting with Qualcomm and then Apple's A series chips, started featuring NPUs, I think back in 2015 or 2016. And then since Apple moved to its own silicon beginning in 2020 with the M series stuff in their MacBooks, that's all featured a neural engine or what could otherwise be an NPU. So when Core Ultra 1 and the AMD equivalent processors came out, I think they were offering below 20 TOPS or trillions of operations per second NPU performance, and there really wasn't like a goalpost to aim for to standardize what an AI PC really is, although those did feature NPUs. What we got, and kind of the first phase of this three-phase strategy that TBR has identified, where Microsoft makes the AI PC indispensable, so really to the killer application, is with capability signaling. So you'll see that as the kind of first step in the phase in the graphic on the slide. And this really began, I think, with the introduction of the Copilot PC category. So that's what created a baseline definition for what an AI PC is, the minimum specifications for the NPU, as well as memory. Those things all gave the ecosystem a clear kind of goal to aim for and guidelines around defining what an AI PC really is. And it's at this time when Microsoft introduced studio effects, so things like background blurring and audio suppression that use the NPU, as well as some flashier features like recall. And what these features did, I think it was maybe a belief among some that recall would have been the killer app. It's TBR's belief that it's not, and I think that's really evident in what we've seen with AI PC adoption thus far. Recall and Microsoft coming out with studio effects, I think what these did was prove the viability of the NPU in the AI PC, and were really points around helping Microsoft market what an AI PC is and what a Copilot PC is. So that was that first phase, and it's still continuing today. And we have it labeled as low risk, and that's because the features are optional. So of course there was the delay in recall becoming available, and then an opt-in when you power on your AI PC for the first time to opt into these features. So understanding that the features are optional is really important, but this capability signaling phase is really to give the ecosystem a definition of what an AI PC is and guidelines to what to build around. Second, we have quiet system augmentation, and this phase is also underway, but really in its infancy, and TBR sees this being the longest phase of the cycle. This is essentially where Microsoft increases the use of local inference in things like Windows Defender or other OS services. And a major focus here, compared to what Angela was talking about with security features, would just be continuous behavioral monitoring. And that's all happening locally, so there's no kind of cloud telemetry here. that's really what Microsoft is trying to develop with the NPU right now. So it's TBR's prediction that most of these OS level augmentations will be optional, but they'll slowly become more and more of a differentiation driver between an AI PC and then non-AI PC capabilities. But again, I think it's important to understand that in this phase, which will go on for a while, it's really not Microsoft pushing, Windows Defender only runs, on an AI PC. It's a situation where Microsoft's kind of framing it like this feature might work best on an AI PC. So that's that second phase, again, going to be the longest phase. And then the last phase is functional dependency. This is the high risk phase, and this is years out in the future. So what will happen in the functional dependency phase is certain security and compliance and OS features will come to assume NPU presence in the PC. And this is at the point where non-AI PCs are continuing to become at a greater disadvantage than their AI PC counterparts. Microsoft will continue supporting non-AI PCs, but slowly, I think we're calling it kind of a soft obsolescence where non-AI PCs will become less and less capable compared to AI PC. And I don't think we're going to see a really hard cutoff immediately at the beginning of this phase, just because the commercial install base is so large in Microsoft's partner ecosystem. But it's important to understand that this phase, as it's implemented, is higher risk, and that's just because it's non-reversible. So for the other phases, for instance, Copilot, Recall, Studio Effects, you can turn those off, turn those on. This will be driving a functional dependency. So I think that's important. It's also the phase that represents the step where we see Microsoft transitioning those previous, optional security and other OS level augmentation features to the killer app category. And it's because, and we really see that being driven by security. So we know security posture kind of near the top of criteria or consideration among commercial buyers. So by tying in, the best security to an AI PC and making that more and more clear, that's really where the AI PC TBR believes becomes kind of this indispensable piece of technology that we see across most large enterprises with adopting those AI PCs. I think the last piece, and tying this into the memory market that we talked about earlier, is that this final phase, this functional dependency phase, really can't happen until the install base of AI PC is very, very large and enterprise backlash is manageable. So the situation with memory prices increasing and delayed refreshes continuing to be pushed out is that that last phase, functional dependency, gets pushed out. I don't think it slows the quiet system and security augmentation phase, but it definitely pushes out the rate at which the install base of AI PCs reaches that kind of tipping point where Microsoft feels comfortable saying, hey, we're going to support non-AI PCs, Windows Defender for Windows number X, but we're cutting that off at Y date with Windows X plus 1. Yeah, I think that kind of wraps up that slide there.
Great. Okay. Well, I know we're at the end of our time here, but I think we can squeeze in a couple quick questions. So Ben, this one, I think, given that you were going over some of the memory impacts, might be an easy one for you. So do you see any other components shortages that would ultimately impact the PC market beyond just memory?
And then the other one that we're seeing now, we see it more when we look at what flash enterprise storage kind of infrastructure vendors are seeing with increasing prices, is that NAND is also going to increase. So when I talked about the memory market, HBMs, that's what capacity is being built out around now rather than the DDR memory for PCs, but it's also coming at the cost of storage capacity build out. So for any of those more advanced SSDs, some of the capacity, the wafer starts that would have been brought online for a NAND are not being brought online for NAND, but rather HBM. I think, again, it's an important thing to talk about. It's not a situation where NAND supply is decreasing. It's just a situation where the supply isn't increasing as fast as demand is increasing. So same thing we see with DDR memory, but I think that is something that's important to note.
Got it. Excellent. Okay, so then our last question before we wrap up is about lead times. So can we share, and this is on actually the server side of the market, lead times between the major OEMs, Dell, HP, Lenovo, Cisco servers based on the component shortage? The short answer would be no. I think the slightly more detailed answer is, where do we see these vendors strategically falling? We see some having more supply chain advantages than others. So Dell certainly at the top of the list there. Lenovo is, their presence in data center is not massive share-wise. However, combined with their kind of number one unit share in the PC business, they have significant buying power as well. I think that benefits them in terms of their supply chain. So those are factors we keep in mind. I would also keep in mind, there's a lot of variability there, obviously, in terms of what are, servers that are considered like a top seller, something that's, already kind of flooded in the channel versus more configured order type of elements. So I do think, vendors will focus on, similar to what we're discussing in the PC space, the focus on where the most concentrated demand is and what can be delivered most quickly. On the AI server side, the lead time it's a fantastic question. So that one I think is really hard to quantify, but if you think about, Dell's orders or, backlog being over $40 billion right now, that, mathematically would take maybe 10 years to fulfill. I don't think if someone places an order tomorrow, they're going to have to wait 10 years. I think that it's hard to view the AI server market because some of these massive orders are in place, but they cannot be fulfilled until the data centers are built to put them in. So there's a lot of dynamics at play there that it's hard to even look at backlog and map that into lead times either because of the complexities and the many other dynamics that go into readiness for even taking those orders. So